For the last 2 weeks, we have analyzed the silence. We analyzed the silence on the radio, the silence of the wreckage, the silence of the void left behind. But the silence was broken. Not by a report, but by a witness. A man named Jonathan Donahue, standing near the runway, heard something that changes the entire physics of this investigation. He didn't hear a smooth takeoff. He didn't hear the normal roar of a citation jet climbing into the gray sky. He heard a sound that every pilot fears. A large, loud pop, like something snapping. Like the machine itself was breaking apart before it even left the ground. And then the struggle began. This single detail, the loud pop, is the missing key. It explains why a seasoned crew flying a capable jet couldn't just circle back. It explains why the turn was so desperate. And it leads us to the new, heartbreaking evidence from the 911 tapes released just 48 hours ago. Witnesses at the Lakewood Golf Club didn't just see a crash, they saw a fight. They described a plane flying right over their heads and splitting the tree line. This was not just a fall from the sky, this was a choice. Today on the Air Debrief, we combine the loud pop, the two texts, and the death roll theory to reconstruct the final heroic seconds of Greg Biffle's flight. We will show you why, in the face of mechanical betrayal, the pilot made one last decision. A decision that likely saved lives on the ground, even as he knew he couldn't save his own. This is the untold story of the heroic last maneuver. Let's start with the witness testimony. Jonathan Donahue said, "It sounded like something broke on the plane at takeoff." In aviation, a loud pop is specific. It is not the deep rumble of an explosion. It is a sharp, violent report, like a shotgun blast. What causes a jet engine to pop? The most likely culprit is a compressor stall. Inside a jet engine, air must flow smoothly from front to back, compressing at incredible pressure. If that airflow is disrupted by a bird, by a piece of debris, or by a mechanical failure, the air can violently reverse direction. It explodes out the front of the engine. Bang! It sounds like a cannon. Flames often shoot out the intake. The aircraft shudders violently. Thrust is lost instantly. If this happened right at rotation, the moment the wheels leave the ground, the pilot is in the worst possible scenario. Low speed, low altitude. And now, asymmetric thrust. One engine is pushing full power. The other is acting like a giant air brake. The plane wants to twist. But there is another, more sinister possibility for the pop. A tire explosion. Consider the dirty configuration theory we discussed. The landing gear was down. If a tire blew out on the takeoff roll pop, it releases the energy of a stick of dynamite. Rubber shrapnel flies at hundreds of miles per hour. What is right above the tires on a citation? The flaps. The hydraulic lines. The wing structure. If a piece of tire shredded a hydraulic line, the flaps could have failed. Or worse, one flap could have retracted while the other stayed down. This creates asymmetry. And this brings us to the theory posed by NASCAR veteran and pilot Kenny Wallace. Kenny Wallace suggested that drag and flaps were the killers. If the loud pop was a structural failure that jammed a flap, the pilot was fighting a machine that wanted to roll over and die from the moment it left the ground. Imagine driving a car at 150 miles per hour, and suddenly, two wheels on the left side lock up. You don't just slow down, you spin. This explains the desperation. This explains why they didn't climb. They weren't just troubleshooting, they were wrestling a dragon. But there is a human element to this mechanical failure that we cannot ignore. It's called the two captains problem. Reports indicate there were multiple qualified pilots on board. Greg Biffle was a pilot. It is likely another pilot was in the right seat. When a loud pop happens at 140 knots, the cockpit turns into a blender of noise and adrenaline. In a single pilot jet, the decision is binary. I fly or I die. But in a dual pilot cockpit, there is a deadly split second of hesitation. Who has control? Did Greg grab the yoke? Did the co-pilot grab it? If pilot A tries to bank right to correct the roll and pilot B freezes on the controls, they are fighting each other, not just the aerodynamics. We call this control confusion. If the flaps failed asymmetrically rolling the plane left, and one pilot instinctively pulled back on the stick to climb, they would have unknowingly accelerated the stall. The loud pop didn't just break the machine, it likely shattered the crew resource management. In those critical 5 seconds after the explosion, while the tire rubber was still raining down on the runway, the confusion inside that cockpit might have been the difference between a recovery and a death roll. Did they waste precious seconds communicating? Did they override each other's inputs? The text message, "emergency landing," suggests they eventually got on the same page. But by then, at 200 feet with a wing dipping toward the trees, physics had already cast its vote. While the pilots fought the machine, the passengers fought their own battle, the battle for information. We now have 2 distinct messages sent from the cabin. Message 1, emergency landing. Message 2, we're in trouble. These are not the same message. Emergency landing implies a procedure. It implies a pilot's voice over the intercom. Folks, we have an issue. We are turning back for an emergency landing. It is calm. It is technical. But "we're in trouble" came from Christina Biffle, Greg's wife. She was likely seated near the front, perhaps right behind the cockpit. She didn't hear the intercom. She heard the reality. She heard the alarms. She saw the sweat on the pilot's neck. She felt the violent yaw of the aircraft as the engine failed. "We're in trouble" is the visceral realization that the plan is failing. By placing these 2 texts on a timeline, we can see the degradation of the situation. T-minus 60 seconds, the pop, T-minus 45 seconds, the pilot announces emergency landing, message 1 sent. T-minus 30 seconds, the plane refuses to climb, the turn becomes too steep. The death roll begins. T-minus 15 seconds, Christina realizes they aren't going to make the runway. "We're in trouble," message 2 sent. This timeline proves that for a brief window, they thought they had it. They thought they were going to make the impossible turn. But physics is a cruel judge. In flight training, every pilot is taught one rule written in blood: the impossible turn. If you lose an engine on takeoff, do not turn back. You land straight ahead. You land in a field. You land in trees. But you do not turn. Why? Because when you turn, you lose lift. When you turn, you increase drag. To maintain altitude in a turn, you must pull back on the yoke. This increases the G-load. But if you have no engine power, pulling back just bleeds off your airspeed. You stall. And in a twin-engine jet with one dead engine, you don't just stall. You VMC roll. The velocity minimum control is the speed below which the rudder can no longer stop the plane from spinning. If Greg Biffle, or the pilot in command, heard that loud pop instinct might have screamed, "Go back to the runway." It is the siren song that has killed thousands of pilots. They initiated the turn. They banked left. But with the gear down, the flaps down, and one engine dead, the plane didn't just turn. It began the death roll. This matches the 911 witness accounts perfectly. It flew right over our heads, banking hard. The pilot was likely standing on the right rudder pedal with all his strength, trying to stop the left wing from dipping into the ground. But gravity was winning.
Hello, I'm at Lakewood Golf Course right now, and we just had a plane fly over our heads and crash into the tree line, and a huge explosion near the runway out here. We're on hole 1, and it came from the tree line to our right, flew right over our heads, and then flipped the tree line by hole 9, and went straight downwards. And huge explosion. I don't know if the guy's okay.
Listen to the 911 description again. Right over our heads. This places the aircraft at an altitude of perhaps 100 or 200 feet. Now look at the map. Directly ahead of the aircraft was the Lakewood Golf Club. It was midday. There were golfers on the fairways. There were people in the clubhouse. There were homes lining the course. If the plane crashes there, the death toll doubles. And this is where the forensic investigation turns into a heroic tribute. In those final seconds, with the alarms screaming and the ground rushing up, the pilot had a choice. He could try to stretch the glide to the fairway, the smooth grass, but that risks hitting people. Or he could aim for the one place where there are no people, the tree line. The witness said the plane split the tree line. That is a precision term. It implies the plane was aimed. It implies that in the face of inevitable death, the pilot looked out the window, saw the golfers, saw the homes, and made the ultimate sacrifice. He pushed the nose down. He aimed for the rough terrain. He chose to take the impact himself, rather than risk the lives of strangers. This is the heroic last maneuver. We often focus on pilot error. We talk about weight and training and baggage doors. But we rarely talk about pilot grace. The grace to realize, I can't save this plane, but I can save the people on the ground. The timeline supports this. The plane didn't tumble into the clubhouse, it didn't slide into a house, it hit the trees. And in doing so, it ensured that the tragedy, while horrific, was contained to those 7 souls who had already accepted their fate. So, how will the NTSB prove the loud pop theory when the evidence is burned? Fire destroys a lot, but it doesn't destroy everything. Forensic metallurgy will tell the story. Investigators are right now looking for the flap jack screws. These are thick steel rods that extend and retract the flaps. They are virtually indestructible. By measuring the extension of the left jack screw versus the right jack screw, they can prove down to the millimeter if there was asymmetry. If the left screw is extended 15 degrees and the right is extended 0 degrees, the Kenny Wallace theory is confirmed. That is the smoking gun. Next, they will look at the engine casing. If the pop was a compressor stall or a turbine blade failure, the inside of the engine shield will have specific scratch marks, like a record player. If a blade snapped, it would have gouged the metal casing before exiting. And finally, the tires. Even in a fire, the steel belts inside the tires remain. Investigators will look for explosive rending, a specific pattern of tearing that only happens when a tire bursts under pressure, distinct from a tire that simply burns in a post-crash fire. They will reconstruct the loud pop from silent pieces of metal. They will map the split tree line using LiDAR scans of the broken branches. Every snapped twig, every bent screw, and every fused wire is a witness that cannot lie. The fire took the aircraft, but it left the fingerprints of the culprit, and those fingerprints point directly to a catastrophic failure that no pilot legend or not could have easily survived. As the NTSB continues their work, they will eventually tell us exactly what made the loud pop. They will tell us if it was a tire, a turbine, or a latch. They will produce a PDF report full of charts and graphs. But that report will not measure the courage it took to send a text message saying, "Emergency landing," to comfort a loved one. It will not measure the agony of a mother who bought a ticket to Italy. And it will not measure the heroism of a pilot who, in his final second of life, steered his dying machine away from the innocent. We started this series looking for answers. We looked for blame. We found something else. We found a story of human fragility and human strength. The loud pop was the beginning of the end. But the split tree line was the final act of character. Greg Biffle lost his family that day. The racing world lost a legend's daughter. But let the record show, when the sky fell, they did not go gently. They fought, they communicated, and they protected those below. To the 7 souls of Statesville, blue skies and tailwinds, we will remember not just how you died, but how you tried to live.